Welcome to the Practitioner's Pathways, a podcast produced by the mental health students at the University of Dayton. This is a discussion by mental health professionals for mental health professionals. I'm your host, Jess, a graduate student in the licensed professional counseling field. Today we are discussing clinical practitioner roles, and we are very excited to welcome our guests, Rita Tilton, Bonnie Parrish, Nick DeGrazia, and Wendy Haynes-Britton. For our podcast today, we wanted to focus on the interprofessional connections that benefit students and clients. Interprofessional connections are the interactions between two or more professionals in the mental health or helping field. Each of our guests represents a unique perspective in the mental health field. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to start by having each guest introduce themselves in turn. Bonnie, would you be able to start for us? Tell us what you do, what kind of environment you practice in, and how long you've been in the field.
You sure you want to know that? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'll start with the last question. I have been in the field for 54 years. I'm old, but I have been practicing the entire time. I've had a wealth of experiences, which I'll be able, hopefully, have opportunities to address during this podcast. But I have a bachelor's degree from Ohio State University and a master's degree from Goddard College in Vermont. And I also hold two licenses, the licensed independent social worker with supervision endorsement and the licensed professional clinical counselor with supervision endorsement. It's a long story as to how I got both, but when you're around so long, they kind of look at you and say, oh, what else can you do? I've had an incredible career. I've been very, very fortunate in my 54 years to touch the lives of many people. I worked with children's and families at several mental health agencies, and I've worked in hospitals. I've worked for the federal government in a program for Indo-Chinese and Southeast Asians. I've been very fortunate to have many doors open for me that have brought very successful counseling and the mental health kinds of experiences. I focused on trauma and developed a cross-cultural community training program for those primarily refugees who were experiencing severe trauma. Currently, I am the Executive Director of Family Services, where Jess is doing her practicum and internship, and we're thrilled to have her. And we are a comprehensive community-based mental health center. We see birth to death. We've been around for 128 years. So the agency, I have a ways to go before I catch up with the agency. We were the first social service agency around. We were here for the flood of 1913. We were here for the Depression. We were Children's Services. We were the Welfare Department. We were all of those things before they became what they are today. So we have a pretty rich presence in this community. And I have a fairly rich, very exciting, I've been very, very fortunate in my 54 years. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. We're excited to learn more about the wealth of knowledge that you have from all those years of serving our community. Nick, do you mind introducing yourself next?
Sure. My name is Nick DeGrazia, and I am a school psychologist and student services supervisor within a public school in the local Dayton area. I've been in public education for 19 years, school psychologist for the last 11 of those years. In addition, I help teach classes as adjunct faculty member here at UD for the school psychology program graduate students.
Wonderful. Thank you for bringing that school perspective for us, both as an educator and working in the field.
Of course.
And Wendy.
Thanks, Jess. Again, my name is Wendy Haynes-Britton. I am the clinical director and co-owner of Clearing Paths Therapeutic Services. We provide mental health and addiction services. I like how Bonnie said from birth to death, and I thought, so I'm going to adopt that as well. I have a professional clinical counselor supervisory license as well as a licensed chemical dependency license. I received my bachelor's at Ohio University in Athens and my master's at Wright State University. I've been a counselor, I'm going to say a little over 30 years. Been in, have many fields, the prison, I've worked with people with disabilities. Currently, Clearing Pass is a community mental health center, so it's just been a variety of settings.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so excited to have you all in conversation with one another, with the variety of experiences that you bring. I imagine we can have a really good conversation with unique perspectives there. So thank you so much for being here. Next up, I'd love to hear what made you choose your specific profession. This can kind of go towards like the approach that you take. What drew you towards school or social work or towards clinical mental health counseling, or what drew you towards the specific environment that you felt called to work with? Wendy, I'd love to start with you.
Really what drew me towards counseling is my upbringing. I grew up in the Bronx of New York and was a victim of and witnessed violent crimes and things like that. Just experiencing people who perplex me. I guess that's the best way to say it. And I was always that why child. You know, some children say when, some children say what, but I was the wild child. Like, why are they doing this? Why is this happening? And so I've always been intrigued by the mind and why people do or say certain things. So, my upbringing was one of those things. And really, I majored in music, even though I was curious about the mind. I majored in music and minored in psychology. Oh, wow. And then back then, being a little older as well, music psychology was not very prominent. So I just focused on the psychology part. But I think what really brought me into the field is just the intrigue I have about the mind. And in doing that, I specialized in working with people with personality disorders because that was very intriguing. So I love the field of counseling and psychology because it is just very fascinating and every day is not the same.
Mm-hmm. What is it about the approach that counseling takes to those issues that you find really works well for you?
I think it's really the basic counseling skills, the attending, the empathy, those kind of basic counseling skills are the approach. Modalities, of course, are good to use and have, but I think it's just being the humanistic part of and knowing that the person in front of you is exactly that, a person. And so recognizing that person first principle. They are a person with this disorder. And I think that's the approach that I like to take.
Person first. I love that. And I saw Bonnie nodding, and knowing Bonnie personally, I feel like there's a lot you could say on that too.
Well, I have to agree with you 100%. That's what this is all about, and that's what really draws us to the field. 54 years ago, when I went away to college, I was young, of course, like 2, and I went away to college. And in those days, you went to college to find a partner and get married and do all those things. So when I decided I wanted to go into social work, because there really was no counseling program at the time, my father said, no, you should stay in education, and you know how that goes. Well, I didn't really listen to my father, though I have for years since, but not at that moment in time. And I really found the field of social work to be embraced in the kinds of things that my colleague next to you were talking about, and that it is about the people that draws you into the profession. It is about that you're the one at the sorority house that everybody comes to when they have a problem. And there is something about your personality that says you're here, you can listen, and you won't judge people. I think that's a very critical issue, not to be non-judgmental. The other part of this is the way we learn is this basic communication, which is something when I started, that was how we learned to do counseling. Active listening, reflection of thought, those basic kinds of things. And of course, these new theories, I remember learning about B.F. Skinner. That was the first one out there. And then all of these other kinds of modalities and theories, and they all came about, and they lived their life and joined the others, so that we really have developed an incredible resource of different modalities and different theories and different thoughts. And you're learning all of those things, and it's important. But the basic line is that we learned how to be non-judgmental, and we learned how to communicate with one another. I think I got into the field for those reasons. I wanted to be that person that would listen to people and not judge them. I had some wonderful mentors in my life, and that was people ask, why did you stay? And I think the reason you stay in this field is because you run across people in your life who become those mentors, those teachers, those professors that really change your life for the better. And I've had those all my 54 years in the field. Around every corner, there's been somebody there to contribute to who I am today. And I think that's a very important reason why I stayed in the field. And then as we developed licensing in the 80s and counseling became an integral part of that process, we learned even more. We learned how to coordinate our theories, how one theory supports another, and that social work and counselors, and then when the board came about and put them together, that was quite a statement. Yes, social work's been around for a while, but the principles are compatible, supportive, and they acknowledged that. And then, of course, adding marriage and family therapy was just another important ingredient to that process. So I can answer anything else you might have that you think.
Thank you.
I know counseling isn't as old as social work, but it still has the same principles at heart.
And it's so interesting to hear about how they developed. I'm sure they were in conversation with one another as they developed. And you have the unique perspective of having lived through that development.
Yes. And they last for so many years, like some of the things when I first started out there was PTSD was very rare. And we assigned it to Holocaust survivors primarily. I worked at an agency that dealt with Holocaust survivors. So that was the diagnosis that we used. But now it's expanded. The DSM came about and helped us categorize and label whatever you want to think about that. But it brought some logic, and it brought some sense to the way that professions were evolving. And if you look back, social work and counseling, they're not very old professions.
Mm-hmm. I love hearing that you ended up in this profession out of a moment of rebellion in some ways.
Yeah, I did. And I have to just add, my father thought when we graduated Ohio State with Bob Hope as the guest speaker, this is a long time ago, Spiro Agnew, you probably don't remember. Mm-hmm. But he thought I graduated in education, and he never really got on until much later in my career that I had left education behind. No offense, Nick, but I left education behind and became a counselor and social worker.
You became a sneaky counselor. I also love what you said about finding mentors along the way. And I think that when you find a mentor who's doing the profession the way that feels inspiring, or is the way that you always envisioned living out your life, that can really call you deeper into the profession. And there are also mentors.
And it has.
Who fully develop the vision for you. And to speak from my own perspective, just as a student, it is so different to learn about the profession in my textbooks compared to learning about the profession from real people who are supervising me. And that makes a really big difference in how I see the profession taking life in my own life.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you as well, Nick.
Sure. Well, I come from a family of public education teachers. And so I think that was where I first kind of got my in. I went to college, studied psychology because I didn't really know what else to do. But like Wendy, I was very interested in how the mind worked and everything I could learn about that. I decided to get in, be a math teacher, just as a profession to kind of hold the place for a little while. I really enjoyed my time there. But that's when I learned about school psychology while I was teaching math in a school. I'd never heard of it before. Yes. And so I ended up going back to school here at the university and got my degree in school psychology because I knew that while I wanted to be in public education, while I wanted to work with kids, I didn't want to be in the classroom, and I felt like I could make more of an impact supporting those students who maybe struggle a little bit more, and school wasn't that natural thing for them like it is for other students. And so I got my degree in school psychology and entered the profession. And when I got there, it was one of those times when I knew I had found the part that I really wanted to do the most. And I knew that I had found what was going to bring me joy and bring me fulfillment within my career throughout my life.
So what makes school psychology particularly different from the psychology degree that you might get in undergrad?
I think school psychology takes the foundations of what you learn in an undergraduate psychology degree, and then it really looks to take some of those ideas and utilize problem solving to help support students who may be struggling in school. So we take and we bring everything together when we bring different teammates together and team members, and we can help students who may not be achieving to the degree that we'd expect them to achieve, and it gets away from the idea of more of the counseling aspect and moves more towards what are the supports that we need within education to help these students reach their potential.
I really like that. I'm also laughing a little because I heard you say earlier, I wanted to get out of the classroom. And now you are an adjunct faculty here at University of Dayton, right?
Correct.
So what do you do in that role, and does that involve classroom presence in any way?
So in my role as adjunct faculty member here, I teach a few different classes to school psychology grad students. I teach the statistics class. I teach a class that focuses on helping a lot of school psychology students have never been in education before, and that's okay. So one of the classes I teach helps kind of get them used to what is education, what are some of the systems involved in education, and what do they need to know, kind of a crash course in education before they get into the schools, so they have a better understanding of how schools function if they didn't come from that education background. And then I also teach a class that just focuses on development from birth up through the end of high school with an educational slant and component to that.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Of course.
So next question, I'd love to hear from each of you, what is the specifics about your field? So what are some of the maybe misconceptions that are had about your field, and what are some of the things that are peculiar or particular to your field that someone who's not in it may not know about? Let's start with Nick.
I think one of the big things is, as a school psychologist, everybody hears psychology and they think it's two people, one person laying on a couch and the other person sitting in a chair and asking them questions and then talking about their life. For school psychology, the big thing is the field has traditionally been in a state of testing, so cognitive assessments, academic assessments, behavioral assessments, and then providing recommendations based off of those assessments as to the rest of the school team and how the school team should work with the individual students. The field is slowly evolving, and kind of we're in a nice period of growth where, like I said, we get more of that problem-solving stage. And so in addition to just testing and then giving the recommendations based off of those tests that we can do with students, we can also work with the students' team to offer practical suggestions for what teachers, for what other staff members in the building can do on a daily basis to help and support that student, like I said, reach their potential.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that there are misconceptions or misunderstandings around your field that the typical layperson may have?
Sure. Yeah. Whenever they hear psychology, they think it's just talking back and forth, and
They think counseling.
they think counseling. Exactly. And as a school psychologist, that is not something that I do on a regular basis. There are people who are much better trained within the school system to handle those counseling roles than the school psychologist is. There are some school psychs who are wonderful counselors and they do a great job at it. But in general, the school psychologist is coming at it more from the academic side of things and the educational side of things versus the mental health counseling.
It sounds like a solution-oriented kind of focus as well. They're gathering information through the testing, the statistics with the student, and then coming up with a plan to help the student succeed better in school.
Sure.
And while there might be empathy and warmth, just like a counselor would bring to those conversations, it's a very different type of approach.
Yeah, I think there needs to be an understanding of we're all here to work and to support this child. And then also coming at it from a point of if a child has made their way to me and to kind of my ring, obviously that child is struggling. Maybe it's just with academics, maybe it's with behaviors, maybe there's some mental health going on there. But bringing that empathy into that overall picture of who the child is. So you're supporting the child and everybody is there for the child, but at the same time, the school psychologist is also there to make sure that the staff, the teacher, the principal, they feel supported as well. Because sometimes when a child may be struggling, that can bring some struggles and frustrations for the staff members. So I like to think that we can go in and we can kind of be that person who brings everybody together and says, I want to do what's best for you, the student. I want to do what's best for you, the staff. With the resources we have, how can we come up with a solution to the problem and make sure that everybody is succeeding based off of that solution?
It sounds like you are the support for the support system for the student.
I am not, on a daily basis, I am not interacting directly with students. I like to interact with students as much as I can on a regular basis, but I am definitely not having that direct interaction with students on a daily basis. So I want to make sure that, like you said, I'm supporting the people who have those direct interactions with those students on a daily basis.
I also like the systems approach that comes up there, where you're working with the entire system that's at play that's impacting the student, because the student's interactions with their principal, their parent, their classmates, and their teacher is going to impact their academic performance.
Very much.
And looking at it from that system's perspective, you can really come up with a more effective solution.
Definitely. That has been an area of growth in education and in school psychology as well, a tiered approach to providing resources and supports to students. So we try to take a look at it from a data-driven perspective and looking at the information that we have, how do we take the resources that we have and give the resources to the students who need them without overusing resources for the students who don't need them.
Thank you so much, Nick. All this talk about systems has me thinking more about the social work field, so let's pass it over to Bonnie. And I'd love to hear from Bonnie specifically about your experience in the social work field, which, as I understand it, has a lot to do with resources and the systems that impact our clients. What makes social work different from the other mental health professions? And what are some misunderstandings or misconceptions about social work that you have run into?
Okay, that's a good question. You have to remember when we started, we were in the 40s. Freud was a big thing. And we were actually, we were friendly visitors. We would go and visit a family if there was somebody who was ill, or if they needed an extra meal, or we would visit just on general principles. We were tending to people who needed help with food, shelter, and clothing. There was no welfare department at the time. There was no government support. And this all came from what really came out of the basement of churches, community houses, neighborhood houses, where they looked at the neighborhood as the primary resource for families in the community. So if your neighbor was sick, you always would take, dinner or a loaf of bread or something to that individual. So that's our history. And if you look at the evolution of social worker, we tried not to go stray too far from that. And so as we grew, we became more visible in terms of a helping profession. We would see people who were still mostly in poverty, and poverty became our critical issue that we dealt with, which leads to some of the misconceptions that we have. Though social work today isn't so focused on poverty, it is still a priority. People in poverty are struggling, not just with food, shelter, and clothing. They're struggling with all of the emotions that are related to that. So what we have when we go and look at the misconception is looking at the history of social work. We're right where we need to be, except for what happened was the funding issue. For years, for 100 years, we were funded by United Ways. And we never had to worry about money. People were very generous to United Ways. We were pretty much almost 100% supported by United Ways. But as United Ways went away and it became more and more important for us to find alternative funding sources, we had to look to Medicare because we're struggling with poverty people, and Medicare and Medicaid. And then we expanded to address the insurances because people were getting on the marketplace and were getting insurances. But I think the misconception, if you go into social work, is that that's not something we traditionally dealt with. We didn't deal with funding issues. We had, for years, or here, even when I first came here, we were dependent upon United Way. And we got raises when United Way gave us a raise. I mean, it was we were tied very closely to that organization. So funding definitely is a new thing for social workers. We never had to deal with it before, and now we do. The second thing, at which you'll laugh, but the second thing is technology. Having been around for so long, I think I won't go into my speech about technology, but I think that is one of the misconceptions that social workers have, old social workers and new social workers, coming into the field, seeing how technology has just taken over the profession. Some good, most not so good, in my opinion. You have ethics, you have confidentiality, you have all of these things that you have to consider as you go forward. And I think sometimes a new social work student coming out of their social work program, which we have here, they learn with technology, so they're very comfortable with it. But when it comes to putting it into their practice, it becomes a real challenge because there are the issues of confidentiality and there are the issues of a clinical review, a clinical audit, all of those things that happen that are something we never had to deal with when we were friendly visitors and went to sit with the children while mom was having another baby or whatever. And when you look at from the 40s to now, it's really not that long of a period of time in our history. So social work has certainly had its growing pains. We do see a lot of people getting into social work now who want to be just clinical counselors, and they're trained accordingly, and that works well. At the same time, we need to have community organizers because if we're going to survive whatever comes down the pike, we have to work together as a community. We have to help our neighbors. Those basic principles that created social work are still present today. We have to assure food, shelter, nothing's changed. So the misconception is social work isn't what it used to be, but it is, and it needs to be. So that's kind of the two misconceptions that I think people entering the field. The other misconception, I taught social work for many, many years at Capital University. And I who are taking social work because they don't have to take math, which was always a draw. They didn't have to take math. So if you had a hard time, or the OSU football players, there were a lot of football players in my social work program who went on to great fame in the football world, but they took social work because they didn't want to take math. And that's okay. But they learned and they are making valuable contributions as I speak. But those are the two primary misconceptions that social workers hold, I think. Funding and technology.
And it sounds as if the profession is what it has always been, and it's had to grow beyond that.
Yes, absolutely. I never dreamed that I would have to become so familiar with it. I remember when the Diagnostic Statistical Manual came out, I remember saying, "Oh, I'll never need this," and I remember how it has evolved to what it is today, and how we became a part of that, and how if you really look at the DSM, you can really identify areas where social work principles are still present.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the community is still counting on social work to provide what it needs, and social workers are having to advocate for funding.
Yes.
To provide those things. So the community needs are still there.
Yes.
And the actual resources and support, both for the clients and for the social workers, needs to be advocated for now, which requires extra energy from the clinicians themselves.
Absolutely. And another thing that happened before we were children's services, family services, before children's services became an entity of the county. And now when you hear social work, you think of children's services, and they're going to take the children away, and all of the bad information that goes around about that. And that's just not always true anymore. We've really tried to impact those old conceptions or those misconceptions, if you will, of social work. We try to keep families together. We try to protect children. We try to do all those things in a very much more, a professional way with the support of the community.
And it's quite an old profession compared to counseling and school psychology, and yet it is still a young profession.
It is a very young. I think psychology is older than us.
Psychology probably. Would school psychology be older?
I don't know.
Maybe around the turn of the 20th century, you might have started seeing some early school psychology come into play, but not much before that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's psychiatry, which I know we don't want to leave out of this conversation, but psychiatry plays a very important role now. Because of the new drugs that are available. When I first started, I was concerned about Ritalin and what that was doing to kids. And now there's just so many drugs. We have, as you know, a psychiatrist on our staff, and that's been a resource. And yet it's also scary for a social worker because we're not doctors, and we don't know the side effects, and we don't know always what's best to look for. So that's always been something we've had to struggle with. But psychiatry is older than social work, but we've kind of now come back where we are understanding the psychiatric piece that the psychiatrists will play in our professions, in both counseling and social work.
We hope to dedicate an entire episode to psychiatry and psychotropic meds. We think it would be a really great topic for professionals to talk about and for our target audience to hear about, because as you mentioned, it's a very complex
topic.
Very complex. And every one of these helping professions comes into contact with that every day with our clients.
Absolutely.
Well, let's bring it over to Wendy for this question. What are things about your field, counseling, that are unique? And what are some misunderstandings or misconceptions that people may have about counseling?
I think the unique thing about counseling, especially in a community mental health setting, is that it's not just the counseling. So there's multiple services that are offered. I think, again, as Nick was saying, people think counseling, so you sit on a couch, and two people in a room kind of thing. But there's also groups. People don't think about group counseling. There's family counseling, couples counseling. Also, there's adjunct services like psych services, case management, which is basically assisting people with daily living and things like that. So there's this consultation. There's so many components that it almost reminds me think about it as an accessory, where counseling may be the body, but those other elements are the earrings and the shoes and things like that. So it's very holistic, and I think that's a wonderful thing about counseling, that you can work with other services. I think another thing about counseling is to be broad in your perspective of working with people, different people with different issues, concerns. I just think it's fascinating how you can work with someone who has anxiety at 1 o'clock, but then PTSD at 2 o'clock, and you're seeing a whole different gamut of people. That could be very intimidating to some people.
And it is for me as a student, that's for sure.
And kind of scary, but I think it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to do that, especially for students.
I love that reframe.
Yeah, because it allows you to be broad, and then, especially again in community mental health, and then narrow down maybe what you want to specialize in. And so you get a taste, quote unquote, of different things that and different people that you can help. So I think that's really just a nice aspect of it.
What I'm hearing is you don't know if you'll like it until you try it.
Exactly.
So it's nice to get some experience in the broad aspect of counseling many different diagnoses.
Yes.
And then over time, you kind of find your niche.
Yes. Because I guess what I was thinking of in finding your niche, as you're saying, Jess, it's I hear a lot of students say the imposter syndrome.
I'm having it right now.
And I don't really like that term for students. I think sometimes new students in a practicum setting feel that, you're ready to walk before you crawl. So it's not an imposter syndrome. It's just a phase that you're in the counseling field. And I love it when new counselors are growing and developing. And again, not just in using different modalities, but in the basic counseling skills. Just even a didactic conversation between two people is therapeutic. You don't have to worry about using CBT and Gestalt, and that's showing my age with Gestalt. But yeah, so you can use just the basic counseling skills. So it's really a profession where. And maybe it's because how I look at it. It's very exciting for me. I love to be able to have a person in front of me and hear what their issues, their problems is, and then say to myself, when you're experienced, to say, "Oh my gosh, I can help you," And so I think that's a wonderful thing about it.
I think you really speak to the misconceptions that students can have, students in clinical mental health counseling, that, you have to learn all of these modalities.
Yes.
We have to know what to say next.
Yes.
We have to know the right skill. And what I'm hearing from you is you really don't have to think too hard about it.
You don't. You just be. And that's what I say to a lot of people. Just be. It is another person in front of you. So just be with them. Be with them in the boat. Don't worry about going anywhere. Don't worry about anything else. Just be with them. Sit with them. Because we all have that humanistic nature in us, so you don't have to worry about, how am I going to fix you? It's not about that. It's just being with them, understanding them, and getting the whole broad picture of them. Clients come to us with just a little small picture, and we want to fix it with that small picture, not realizing the whole picture. So that's something we have to take into consideration.
So one of the differences I'm hearing is school psychology by nature is more solution focused. And in counseling, there is an encouragement to not worry as much about finding the exact right solution right now for your client.
Yes.
That the organic experience of being with a warm, empathetic presence is really at the heart of it.
Yes. I think that's one of the misconceptions, as you were mentioning, because in counseling, unfortunately, people don't see counseling as a quick fix. We work with a lot of psychiatrists, and people want to come for that pill that helps my anxiety, or it's a quick fix versus the counseling part. And so, that misconception of that it's a hoax, or it's not real. Like, how are you going to talk to me and help me? But if you really think about it, each and every one of us are doing some form of quote unquote psychology or counseling for ourselves. When we're sad, we have things where we can help us not be sad, and things like that. So it's just all of us. We do it a little bit anyway. It's just that we have professionals now who can kind of push you in a more direct area.
I like to think of counseling as guiding someone or walking with them through the process of change.
Yes.
Walking with is a lot like sitting in a boat with.
Yes.
It's a
yes.
with profession.
Yeah. I was going to also say one of the misconceptions of counseling, or basically for community mental health, is, and I hate to say this, but it's not all counseling. I really think like maybe 40%, and I don't know if Bonnie could agree with this, maybe 40% is counseling and 60% is probably some of the other administrative things and billing things. We would all love to be, and that's when I knew growing up, I wanted to be like Sigmund Freud, come in, lay on my couch, talk to me. But, I have to document this. I have to, bill a service. I have to do releases of information. You have to sign a consent. So you have to think about those things, too. And I think that's important for people to know. It's not all counseling, even though counseling is wonderful, but there is a big administrative part to it.
Yes, brought about by the ethics of the profession.
Yes.
You really need to be competent
Yes.
in the ethics of what you're doing
Most
and how
definitely.
to document and all that.
Yes.
Well, thank you all so much. We are going to go on to our last and final question, and we will start with Bonnie for this one. How can other mental health practitioners best collaborate with your discipline?
Well, let me start out by just piggybacking on to what Wendy was saying. A lot of what we still deal with are turf issues, and it boils down to money. And I have to say that there's no one who will pay for, or no one we can bill for collaborating with others. So as great as it is for us to be able to do that, and it happens. I mean, I go to lunch with the director of East End or a Daybreak or someone else. Those things happen. Those are very important. I maintain those relationships. But the reality of it is we're all fighting for the same dollar. We all want to be able to get what we can, and nobody's going to pay, even productivity, for example. Some agencies have 100% productivity. We have a 65% productivity. Whatever it is, we're fighting for the clients. We're fighting for the dollar that's associated with that. The second important thing is that no one's going to pay for collaboration now. We did it much easier when United Way, we had a team of United Way agencies that got together every month, and it was a great collaboration. And then United Way goes away, so we don't have that anymore because nobody's willing to pay for it. That's pretty awful to say in this day and age, but it's, for me as an administrator and an executive director, it's the truth. It's one of the things that is hardest for us to deal with, the fact that it's important. It's the most important thing. And I've been very fortunate to have great collaborative relationships. And I've evidenced that throughout my history. But the reality is right now, nobody's going to pay for it.
I hear you. It's both the most valuable part of being in this profession and something that you kind of have to allocate into your schedule as a professional because it might not be a billable hour.
Right. And then when you have some agencies that have very high productivity standards, it's not allowed. You just can't sacrifice seeing that client. And it's an ethical issue too, because yes, you want to see that client, but we also need to recognize the importance of collaboration, of getting out into the neighborhoods, of looking at people and talking to them. It just doesn't happen.
What are the specific connections you would like to see between social work and other helping professions that you think would help clients more?
Well, I can say that any collaboration that would benefit reaching out. For example, we have the Trauma Recovery Center here now. And to be able to partner with somebody where we have in the past and currently do with East End Community Services, and they run across somebody who's a victim of a trauma, there's an automatic referral source here, and they come and bring that person to us. Those are all the results of personal relationships that exist out there. It's probably the most important thing to happen. And I don't know that there's a list that one could put out, because you never know where you're going to run across somebody who might be the one person who's going to benefit from your services at that moment in time. So the most you can do, the best you can do, that would be my response. Do it always, do it often, as much as you can. And there's no limits. We work closely with the governor's office. We work closely with the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. We have our deaf program. We work with all of those people as part of our job. It would be great if we could spend more time and do more of the collaborative kinds of activities.
What I'm hearing is having a personal relationship is really what helps to maintain and solidify those referral sources. So that way, when your client comes to you with a specific issue, I might imagine, man, I don't know if that's really within what I do as a counselor, but I have a friend who's a social worker, or I have a friend that works for the city, and I know that they will know better. And that will be a way for me to just ask them, are there any resources that would benefit this client?
And what happens with those situations is there is a transfer of trust. Your client trusts you, and now you're telling them to contact your friend. And there is a transfer of trust, and that's very, very important. And it just doesn't happen enough. People don't take the time to do it because nobody will pay for it.
Transfer of trust. Well, you can't assign a dollar value to trust.
No.
Thank you, Bonnie. Nick, I'd love to hear from you. What are ways that other mental health professionals can collaborate with and assist your specific discipline?
As I was listening to Bonnie talk, I think a lot about a lot of the students that I'm working with and a lot of the families that I'm working with have support through many different means outside of the school. And the best way that I think we could collaborate together is just not operating in a silo. So we're doing things at school. We've got medical professionals, psychiatrists who might be doing something from that perspective, mental health therapists doing something from their end, social workers doing something from their end. So this one student has all these different people working for them and fighting for them and helping to move them forward. But so many times we get caught up in doing everything that we are in our own little silo that we don't see the larger picture of who this child is and the support the child is receiving. So, and I think that collaboration can help the individuals do a better job when it comes to their specific profession. So if I at school know what the medical providers are doing, I can work better with that. Maybe we need to think about how this child is getting their medication throughout the day. If I know that there's a social worker involved and maybe they have case management with what's going on, I can rely on that case manager to help make sure that child is getting to the appointments they need to get to outside of school. If we were working with a lot of mental health therapists where they'll say, well, have you tried X, Y, and Z? And sometimes the school has tried X, Y, and Z. So getting to be at the table together, you can get rid of a lot of the this has already been tried, why don't we try this? Or, oh, we haven't even thought of that. And you can kind of cut to the root of the problem more, and you can have a better path forward because you're not having to go back and forth between people who are doing their own thing, again, in the best interest of the child. But when you can combine all of that together, it's really going to help to get that child moving the direction we want them to move at a quicker pace.
Sounds like everyone is doing the best that they can. And by conversing with one another, you can streamline those efforts. They become more efficient, more effective even, because then you have everyone doing what they're doing with the knowledge of the other efforts being made for that student's success as well.
Sure. If you have a counselor who's working with a kid and they say, man, I wish the school would have tried this, and the school could say, oh, we tried that, that counselor is then able to move on to, okay, if that didn't work, here's what I would suggest next. So you can get through a lot of the what if you do this, what if you do this, what if you do this, and say, all of those things have been done. Let's move on to the next thing that might be the better option. Because I know that counselors and any different profession, obviously their knowledge is so much deeper than mine of what they do. I can't say, well, next in line for counseling would be this. We need those people at the table saying, this is what I suggest if this didn't work.
What came to mind as you spoke was a parent-teacher conference where the parent and the teacher are both trying to support the student, and they have a conference to discuss, well, what are you trying? What are you trying? How can we join our efforts?
Indeed.
So I wonder, how can we have a conference between, and that's a loose word, this is a figurative word, not a literal meaning of conference, but how can we have a figurative conference between the support systems for the student while still maintaining ethical boundaries around information that cannot be shared outside of the school or cannot be shared outside of the counseling room? Are there ways that you have experienced in your profession where people can converse about the client in a way that's helpful?
I think it all starts with the family and the parents, especially when children are minors, of, we bring everybody to the table first, and getting that permission just from the parent up front of, hey, I want to talk. So record releases and releases of information, and knowing up front that we're all going to be conversing within the school system and within special education law. We have that flexibility of when it becomes necessary for that child's education, we are allowed to converse with agencies and people outside of public education. So we do have some of that flexibility built in, but to get back to the idea of just let's keep it on the up and up. Let's do our releases. Let's do everything up front. Be open with the parent. We want to talk to these people. Is it okay if we talk to these people? And having the parent at the table when you're having some of those conversations, it just makes everything easier from the beginning when that is the route that you're going to take.
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of what Wendy was talking about with there's more to counseling than just talking with your client. There's the ethics, the notes, the release of information, and that can be a really effective way of getting better support for your client as well.
Most definitely. With collaboration, I think that's what we have to look at it as collaboration and not competition. We're all fighting for that dollar bill, unfortunately, and when we do that, the client becomes last on the list. And so I think to have friendly, I'm going to say, collaboration is just really putting the client first. That person-centered approach and knowing what's best for them. And yes, having colleagues. One thing for collaboration, I also consider it as networking. So I attend a monthly group of other people in the field, which we network, but we also collaborate. We pass out our business cards and our pamphlets and things like that. So that's a nice way also to collaborate and just get the services that the clients need. Long time ago, there used to be a book that Montgomery County put out, and it was like a community resource book, and it had a lot of the providers and a lot of services and things like that, which allowed you to more easily collaborate. Sometimes as providers, we get stuck if a client presents with a certain issue and is like, well, who does this? Then that's where the collaboration falls. We can look it up on the internet, but that's where, you have to think how to collaborate and who to collaborate to. Just because you see a type of agency on the internet, how do I know it's good? I don't want to refer you to an agency that may not be able to help you or that's not really good or anything like that. So
that's where the transfer of trust is so helpful when you know who you're referring your client to.
Yes, and I think it's really important for us as professionals in this field to collaborate, really network, to know each other, to get together, to talk about the issues that are going on, not just in the counseling field, but whether it's funding or, just other things going on in the field. It is so important for us to do that. And then when we can do that, we can just build a stronger foundation versus all these different providers or entities operating separately. We really need to work together.
I love what you're saying about it sounds like it's an in-person group.
Yes.
Where you meet with other people. I think an in-person connection with someone else makes a really big difference because, in my personal opinion, trust is formed on a deeper level when there's an in-person interaction. And that becomes the referred trust that you would then pass your client to them through.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful thing, and that is very important, Jess. Again, knowing a colleague that I've worked with or have heard about before, I'm most likely going to refer to that colleague than someone else. So, yes, because the client is counting on me, they are in a distressed state, so I don't want to add to that. So it's important to know that I can send you or refer you to a place that I know can help you. And then in that collaboration, the two providers need to communicate with each other. It's not like I'm passing this person off to you.
And then you wash your hands of
right,
that. No.
Exactly. So there has to be that kind of collaboration also. Again, where it's continuity of care.
I so agree with Wendy. I think she brought some very good points to the table. And I think that's an excellent way. I think that personal contact, I think with COVID, it really lost its way. I think those relationships are so critical for referrals, for collaboration, for feeling better ourselves or getting support for ourselves. I agree so with Wendy.
Yeah. I sometimes I think of it as can we all just get along?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's so many. Unfortunately, this is a bittersweet profession.
Yes,
and so many people have so many issues and concerns that we don't have to fight over it. Let's just help the person. And so I just just get along.
And what each of you has spoken to made me think of how when I connect with other professionals, whether they're a counselor or a different helping profession, it helps me feel better because, as you say, this can be a very isolating field. In my internship, I sit in a room with my client, I finish the session, I walk them up, and I walk my next client back.
Yeah.
The lunch that I have with my coworker is vital for me to just talk to another human being where I can maybe process how weird it is to be a student counselor, general parts of this experience and feel less alone. And that is so therapeutic for myself, not only as a student, as a counselor, as a helper, as an empathetic person, just to feel as if, man, I'm on a team. I'm not doing this by myself. There is a team of people doing this around me. And it's a really good reminder when I get those in-person conversations with others on that. So big thank you to Rita Tilton, Bonnie Parrish, Nick DeGrazia, and Wendy Haynes-Britton for being our guests today. We learned so much about each of your roles, how they are different from one another, how we can collaborate. I loved the personal touches and just how you came to the profession that you chose. Your individual journeys getting there was really cool to hear about. If our guests want to know more, please contact us or our guests using the contact information that we will publish alongside the podcast. We have our link tree with resources and our email down below. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Practitioner's Pathway.